So yeah, if you don't know, a very very historic election just happened in Bolivia, um, and I'm actually this is a very complicated situation. So I did some research, like for like an hour before the podcast today, and I'm just kind of gonna break it down. And I'm actually really interested in hearing all of your thoughts as well while I sort of do this breakdown of Bolivia. So in order to talk about what happened in Bolivia, we first have to talk about Evo Morales, who was Bolivia's president for the past 3 terms. So during his term, um, Evo Morales was the candidate for the Movement Towards Socialism Party in Bolivia, and it's important to recognize that Bolivia is still a developing country. And during their development, they were kind of influenced. They had ties to the World Bank and the IMF, who basically have an interest in purporting capitalism. So Evo Morales is definitely not the candidate for the World Bank and the IMF. But during his presidency, he did some insane things. Literacy rates absolutely plummeted. They had the highest in South America, but during his presidency, the UN fucking education whatever announced that Bolivia had completely gotten rid of illiteracy. He developed cultural projects. He took control of Bolivia's natural resources, things like lithium, which people like Elon Musk absolutely dry out Bolivia from. He took control of some of them, which further freed it from the World Bank and IMF. He was very critical of U.S.'s foreign affairs, their ties to things like the war on terror. Not their ties, I mean their direct involvement with the war on terror. Even going so far as to go to a UN meeting and just straight up like condemn the UN's involvement. I came back to screen and I'm looking at what you're doing and I condemn this. He facilitated the creation of a new constitution that did so much for the country. It completely revolutionized the way that it was ran, and it flipped the government on its head. So before this new constitution, it was the Republic of Bolivia, and now it's the plurinational country of Bolivia, which recognized the sovereignty of different subsets within the state. And at the end of his first term, he still won with 64% of the total vote, and that was only in his first term. Even after that, he developed protections for women against domestic violence. 50% of his cabinet was women, 50% were men. He became the longest reigning president in Bolivia's history and introduced sweeping climate change reform. So Morales' presidency, of course, it's a developing country, so you have pretty extreme ideologies on either side. I mean, one of the parties is literally socialist, openly. So, of course, it had its huge controversies, and it had its fair share of interferences. So many groups started violently demonstrating, and they started to demand even more autonomy than the government had already granted them through the new constitution from the increasingly left-wing government. So Morales believed this to be because capitalist and other right-wing forces in various states wanted to continue to protect their assets from the government, so he refused. He didn't grant them that autonomy. Then it was revealed that the United States was largely funding these pro-autonomy groups. This led to a back and forth of removing ambassadors, Peace Corps, and the Drug Enforcement Administration. The Bolivian government removed the Bolivian government started to remove their ambassadors. So the U.S. removed theirs. The Bolivian government removed the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, which handles things like drug trafficking, some of which is coming from Bolivia. They kicked them out. So then the U.S. removed the Peace Corps. So diplomatic tensions were not good between the two already because the U.S. was funding these violent right-wing groups. Because of that, South American figureheads like Cesar Chavez stood in solidarity with Bolivia, and they continued to expel ambassadors and U.S.-backed organizations from their countries, until the Union of South American Nations met and fully backed Morales' regime. Now, here's where we get into what's relevant to us now, right? So we've already talked about how Morales, of course, he wasn't like just a pure figure for good. I mean, he had his big share of controversies, like I said, but he was a strong leadership figure in Bolivia who turned the fate of the country upside down in a good way, and had U.S. supported, U.S. funded opposition. So, in Morales' new constitution, he introduced a 2-term presidency. He argued, however, since his first term was before that new constitution, it doesn't count, and he should be able to run for 2 more. So, I think this is a little weird. I'm not the biggest fan of this. I like term limits. I think term limits are a good thing. But in his subsequent 2 terms, it's important to note that he still democratically won, right? And he continued to do all the good boy stuff he does. But then, after his 3rd term, he started to he basically wanted to eliminate term limits completely. Him and the movement against socialism party, or movement towards socialism party, wanted to prop up Morales as their candidate once again. So, they introduced a referendum to eliminate term limits. This doesn't mean he would be president for life, but it would mean he can continue to run for as many terms as he wants. This passed in Bolivia's Congress with a huge margin, but it barely lost in the national vote. So in 2017, the Movement Towards Socialism Party put it up to Bolivia's Supreme Tribunal, basically their equivalent of a Supreme Court, and they ruled this vote to be unconstitutional, with the Movement for Socialism Party citing the American Convention on Human Rights as implying that term limits are against human rights. So the tribunal agreed, but a lot of critics say that the Supreme Court was stacked with pro-Morales judges. So, now it's time for their election. Here's how those work. A candidate needs to win in Bolivia, a candidate needs to win by 10% or more in order to secure the election, otherwise they'll do a second round. Now there's a quick count and an official count, just like in our elections. The quick count is what's reported by the media, while the official count is reported by whatever the election committee is. So the quick count doesn't really have any official standing. It's just basically giving something for the media to report. Now, the quick count went dark before the official count was released. For about 20 hours, blackout on the quick count. Now, this makes sense. I mean, quick counts kind of always go dark before 100% of the votes are counted, because you don't want to get into a situation where what the media is reporting and what the official count is are different, right? Like, let's say Morales won by just under 10 points, and say that the official count is that he won by just over 10 points or whatever. That would be really, really problematic and lead to protests. But this 20-hour blackout led to huge widespread protests because of how contentious the election was. And with infighting within the MAS and increasing right-wing violence. So when the official count was actually released, it was revealed that Morales won the election just over 10 points. So immediately, forces like the Organization of American States, the OAS, an organization that was literally founded to keep out left-wing governments post the Cold War, declared the election illegitimate and said that there was tampering by Morales' party. Again, right-wing violence took over the country, and Morales had to take refuge in the countryside, after which the military showed up and told Morales to leave, and he was exiled from the country while resigning as president to stop the bloodshed. Since then, independent researchers have said that the OAS's claim was based on faulty data and no statistical evidence, and Bolivia's now far-right government, along with the OAS, condemned the researchers. Evo and everyone in his administration was formed to step down. The If you take a look at the actual results and the poll numbers, they were fairly close. I mean, the polling numbers also had Evo Morales winning, but there's basically like a huge sort of asterisk to the OAS's claim, because a lot of researchers say that the OAS really has no basis. Yet, I can't remember exactly what the number was. I think it was like 73% of people believe that there was tampering within Bolivia's election. So where are we now? So it's been a year. Bolivia just redid their election, and the movement towards socialism candidate Luis Arce was elected president with 55% of the vote, 88% of the turnout, and almost a 30-point lead against the incumbent Carlos Mesa. So Carlos Mesa was the candidate that took over once Morales was exiled. This is a huge, huge win for socialism, for leftist policies, and for Bolivian democracy. So despite interference, large political conflicts, and what can only be classified as a military coup, Bolivian democracy has been restored, and they have chosen their party. So Bolivia, and this is the most interesting thing, because recently, up until like sort of the end of Morales's presidency, he was starting to adopt more a hardlined socialist rhetoric. So he was saying that he wanted to turn Bolivia into a communal socialist state, which, come on. So Bolivia is going to be a very interesting case study in a living, breathing, developing leftist government. I mean, Matt, you and I have sort of had these conversations before about sort of communism and capitalism, how people are like, communism never worked. Well, I mean, like capitalism also had its failures in its original come up, right? So this could very well be an example of a successful leftist government, which would be interesting. I mean, they've democratically won 4 elections in a row. Whether or not you choose, if you choose to believe the OAS's report, or I guess 5, if you don't. So I mean, that's where we're at now. The right-wing incumbent lost by 30 points. And even with people like figures like the Associated Press saying like, oh, the count was pretty slow, but Morales's party already declared victory, and the right-wing incumbent straight up just conceding it at the same time as Morales's party declared victory. There's clear sort of a propaganda divide going on between like U.S. propagandists and I use propagandists in not like a loaded way, but just like what the word actually means. It's
chat is yelling at you for ignoring
chat's
them
yelling
right
at
now.
me. Oh shit, I wasn't even looking at chat. Sorry, I was looking at okay. Oh, we have a CIA operator in here.
Uh-huh.
We have a CIA op. Morales should be in a USA black site right now. Goddamn commie dictator. There was tampering. This is proven. Some governments should be cooed. I mean, I would agree that some governments should be cooed, but I don't know if one that objectively drastically improved the living conditions of his people and democratically won the election, I don't know if that should be cooed. But thank you, CIA op. Look at Matt growing out his beard a little. Makes me want to, ooh, red flag. We're being ignored so hard right now. Sorry, Chris. Loving you, looking at you right now. But that's where we're at with Bolivia. So I think we should all really be paying attention to South America. We should all really be paying attention to Bolivia. And we should see where we go from here. Because this does have huge implications on America, too. America has vested interests in going against Bolivia's government. I mean, if you don't know, one of the biggest exports that we get from them is lithium. Lithium, which is of course what Tesla uses in their car batteries. Tesla's stock, which is something interesting. Tesla stock um, after Bolivia's government was couped, after Morales was exiled, skyrocketed. It jumped after the right wing dude Carlos Mesa took power, and after the recent election, it plummeted.
I would like to add a caveat. Basically, all stocks plummeted that day.
Shit,
For
dog.
all mine did.
But yeah,
It
but I
was a
mean
very
that.
sad
I mean,
day.
I mean that's what I'm. That's kind of what I'm saying is like it's not as if Bolivia moving towards socialism, willingly, democratically moving towards socialism, um, is an isolated sort of incident, right? Because I mean, a large portion of some of South America, like Venezuela, Cuba, have been moving towards socialism for a while. Um, it's very interesting. Imagine forcing your people to suffer because you don't want to sell your lithium to feed them. We really do have a CIA op in here. Bolivia is still a developing government. I don't think Bolivia should have to be dependent on another country using its exports for it to thrive. And Bolivia is doing pretty well. I mean, they haven't just outright banned the export of lithium, but they are weeding it out and they are becoming self-sufficient. I don't have a problem with the state becoming self-sufficient.
I mean, admittedly, they're basically just not trying to pull a Venezuela.
Yeah,
You know,
or a Russia,
they
or
have,
a
yeah,
they're not being
they know
isolationist, but they're also not being what's the imperialist, I guess.
Yeah, well, because what happened a lot in Venezuela is that they're like, oh shit, we have the largest oil reserves in the world. Let's just export this shit like no tomorrow. And then they're like, oh shit, inflation, because they
Yeah,
didn't diversify their economy. Bolivia is ran, if you agree with them or not, smarter people. They understand how economics work and they understand how trade works. Also, lithium is like the second most common mineral on Earth. The U.S. gets most of its lithium from Nevada and Australia. If we don't get some from Bolivia, it's really not the end of the world.
mm-hmm.
It's like literally everywhere.
And it's not the end of the world for Bolivia either. Bolivia will continue to survive and they will continue to thrive.
I am very much one of those types of people, because you mentioned that like living experiment. I'm very much one of those types of people, especially when it comes to like domestic policy, to try it like on like a smaller scale first and then see how it works on a larger scale. Because I mean that's basically what like legalization of marijuana was. They were like, all right, we'll let like Colorado do it, and if Colorado isn't on fire in the next couple of years, it probably isn't that big of a deal. And then Colorado was just bulling.
Look up infant mortality in Bolivia. Dude, it's still a developing nation. Like, no one's claiming that Bolivia is, like, on par with Europe or America. This dude's, like, brain dead. Who do we have in chat?
And, I mean, obviously...
Why have we not acknowledged Matt's Copenhagen yet? Matt, are you packing a lip?
No.
You packing a lip on stream?
Unfortunately not.
Sad.
No, I mean, fortunately. But, I mean, it realistically probably the more that Venezuela becomes wealthy, the more realistic they will more moderate on its issues. For that is the inevitability of the world. It seems like.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, because I mean, like, you can look at like smaller, like quote wealthy nations, but not like huge nations, such as like Denmark. They're not like as left on a lot of issues as Bolivia is. But they're definitely left of like most capitalist nations in a lot of ways. I mean, they pay their students to go to college.
Who are you talking about? Like Denmark and Norway? And
Denmark.
Yeah.
I know Denmark specifically, and so does Iceland, I think.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of like those kind of European countries are like pretty socially democratic.
Yeah, like they're like well off countries. Let's say.
Yeah, wealthier countries. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not packing like a $20 trillion economy, but
Yeah.
They're
But if
not
you
like
look at it in terms
struggling.
of like whatever the American dream is, it
Yeah.
seems to be more alive in those countries than it is in
Oh,
America.
definitely. I think Denmark is literally the like most small business friendly
Yeah.
country in the world. Like
Yeah.
that's crazy.
And it'll be really interesting to see where Bolivia goes from here because again, it is still a developing country. I mean,
Mm.
we've seen countries like Russia and countries like China switch to communist, whatever your interpretation of that is, um, and just pretty much either fail or turn into authoritarian hellscapes.
Yeah.
Um, but it seems like this has been largely successful. So I mean, even as a leftist, it's a very interesting living experiment to look at Bolivia and to study Bolivia and see what's working there and
And also
what's
see
going
what's
well.
not working, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. I mean, like that's a cool thing about like
I mean,
living
it's not as
experiment.
if Bolivia's government is free of corruption. I mean, they literally
Obviously.
staged a coup. Um,
Yeah.
and it's not as if the MAS is free of infighting. So, good luck to Bolivia. Hope all goes well, little guy. And we'll see what happens there in the future.